You're listening to Morbid Travels with Cassie Leigh. For more content, including more cool stories, follow us on Substack. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and of course, join me on my personal pages to let me know how I'm doing at DatCasto. As far as morbid locations go, I like to think there aren't many that I don't already know about, specifically in the USA. After all, I've more or less dedicated my young adult life to reading and writing about all things true crime and morbid curiosity. So imagine my surprise when, while watching a true crime show the other day, they mentioned a plague island I had never heard of. Naturally, I was confident they were referring to Pavia, Italy, an infamous quarantine island rumored to have once been used to isolate victims of the plague, a place I first learned about many moons ago thanks to an episode of Ghost Adventures. Embarrassing but true. I once owned a shirt that read, "I want to be locked down with Zach." Honestly, that sentiment still stands. And also, I still have that episode on a DVD sitting above my TV right now, but I digress. To my surprise, though, Pavia, which is absolutely worth a post on its own, was not the island being discussed at all. It was instead an island just off of the Big Apple. It never occurred to me that New York City, a place I had been many times, a city so thoroughly documented it feels incapable of hiding anything that morbid, had its own version quietly sitting in the East River. While the two plague islands share surface level similarities, both largely inaccessible and absent from tourism brochures, New York's brother island was built for a different kind of outbreak. Not the bubonic plague, but more modern killers like smallpox, tuberculosis, polio, and typhoid. New York City, New York, 1800s. The city was swelling at a dangerous pace, immigration booming, tenements packed tight, and sanitation lagging far behind the population growth. Much like during the medieval bubonic plague, infectious disease moved faster than public understanding could keep up. While the 1800s were not that long ago, they existed in a world before modern medicine, antibiotics, or childhood vaccines. Diseases we have now nearly eradicated through vaccination, like smallpox and polio, tore through entire neighborhoods. Bacterial illnesses that today can be treated with a simple course of antibiotics, like tuberculosis, lingered in overcrowded housing, while typhoid stalked families with no warning and little explanation. By the late 1800s, New York City officials were facing a public health crisis with few reliable tools. But one strategy had proven effective for centuries: isolation. Now enter North Brother Island, aka New York's Plague Island. Located in the East River between the Bronx and what is now Rikers Island, North Brother Island had remained largely undeveloped for most of its early history. That changed in 1885 when city health officials relocated Riverside Hospital there from Blackwell Island, today known as Roosevelt Island. Founded decades earlier as a smallpox hospital, Riverside was expanded on North Brother Island into a quarantine facility designed to house patients suffering from the city's most feared and contagious diseases. The island's location was intentional. It was strategically close enough for supply boats, doctors, and staff to reach it, yet isolated enough to keep outbreaks and the people associated with them out of public view. Over time, the hospital complex grew into a collection of wards, pavilions, and isolated cottages, each built to separate the sick from the healthy and, often, from one another. Those sent to North Brother Island were not criminals, though many arrived under guard. Some were critically ill, while others appeared perfectly healthy, but were suspected of carrying disease. More on that shortly. Children were ferried there during polio outbreaks, immigrants were quarantined, and the poor and working class were disproportionately represented, their confinement framed as a necessity sacrifice in the name of public safety. Once across the water, freedom was no longer guaranteed, and for some, North Brother Island became far more than a temporary stop. North Brother Island was not built to heal so much as it was to contain, and no one embodied that reality more than a lowly immigrant cook named Mary, Typhoid Mary. She is often blamed for the deaths of several locals. Typhoid Mary's story is, in reality, a very tragic one. Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary, was an Irish immigrant cook in New York, and she was the first identified asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever in the United States. Between 1897 and 1907, she worked for several households, during which more than 100 people are believed to have fallen ill under her care. Conservative estimates attribute at least 3 confirmed deaths linked to her. As it turns out, despite appearing perfectly healthy herself, Mary carried Salmonella typhi, the bacteria responsible for typhoid fever. At a time when proper hand washing and food safety standards were poorly understood, her work as a cook placed her in constant contact with other people's meals. Even routine tasks like peeling potatoes, stirring soup, or preparing ice cream could transfer microscopic traces of bacteria from her hands or utensils into the food she served. Once ingested, the bacteria could multiply in the intestines and bloodstream, sometimes leading to severe illness or death. Germ theory was still in its infancy, and because Mary never became sick herself, she had no reason to suspect that she was the source of these outbreaks. To her, the repeated illnesses of those she cooked for seemed less like cause and effect and more like a tragic coincidence. However, the deaths that followed her raised suspicion. In 1907, epidemiologist George Soper identified Mellon as a likely source of repeated outbreaks. She was forcibly quarantined at Riverside Hospital on North Brother Island. She was released in 1910 under the condition that she would no longer work as a cook and would report regularly to health authorities. But after a 1950 outbreak at the Sloane Maternity Hospital, it was found that she violated these terms and was returned to North Brother Island, where she remained until her death in 1938. By the time she died in 1938, Mary had spent nearly 30 years confined in North Brother Island. Her nickname, Typhoid Mary, became a byword for anyone who spreads disease, and she has been fictionalized in plays, books, and media, cementing her place in American popular culture. While Mary was perhaps the most infamous resident of the island, she was far from being the only resident. Exact numbers are difficult to pin down, but historians estimate that hundreds, possibly thousands, died on North Brother Island over the decades it operated as a quarantine and hospital site. North Brother Island outlived its role as a quarantine island as medical advances made isolation less necessary by the 1930s. After World War II, it briefly housed veterans and their families during a housing shortage, then later reopened in the 1950s as a troubled drug treatment center for adolescents, and closed in 1963. Since then, the island had remained largely unused, with various redevelopment ideas proposed but never realized, leaving it abandoned and in limbo. Which brings us to now. Visiting the scene today. Today, North Brother Island remains strictly off limits to the public. Although city officials have floated the idea of its reuse for decades, ranging from selling the island to converting it into housing, or even expanding Rikers Island, none of those plans ever moved forward. Instead, the island is now managed and protected as a wildlife sanctuary, home to herons and other wading birds, with public access strictly prohibited. While roughly 25 original hospital buildings still stand, most are in advanced states of decay. Structural instability, open manholes, collapsing roofs, and pervasive poison ivy make the island extremely hazardous. For these reasons, access is limited to rare escorted visits granted only for compelling academic, scientific, and journalistic purposes. Over the years, there have been periodic discussions about opening the island for limited environmentally sensitive access, but studies have consistently found that cost and safety concerns are prohibitive. Occasional media crews have been allowed to document the site, revealing the landscape that is both eerily beautiful and dangerously unstable. As recently as 2025, a fire on the island required a multi-agency emergency response, further highlighting just how fragile and inaccessible the site remains. For now, North Brother Island is best viewed from a distance, an abandoned chapter in New York City's history, sealed off by safety concerns, nature's reclamation, and the weight of what happened there.